Forgotten in the suburbs of Denver. My name is Ashley Parker, and my earliest memories are wrapped in the quiet rhythm of Aurora, Colorado, a suburb that looked like something out of a Home Depot catalog. Rows of tidy two-story brick houses, lawns trimmed to perfection, and driveways marked with weathered chalk lines for basketball games. From the outside, we were the picture of normalcy, a middle-class family living on a street where every neighbor waved hello in the mornings. But behind those red bricks was a different story, one of being invisible in my own home. Dad, John Parker, was the quintessential sports dad, the guy who could quote every Denver Broncos stat, but forgot my birthday at least twice. An insurance agent by trade, he'd spend his days schmoozing clients and his nights glued to the TV, cursing at football reruns or popping open a beer whenever his team scored. Mom, Linda, always seemed to be in motion. A flurry of work emails from the law office, PTA bake sales, or wrangling bills at the kitchen table. She had a knack for organization, but not for noticing silences. Then there was Michael, my big brother, 3 years older and forever the family's pride and joy. If he so much as sneezed near a trophy, it wound up polished and displayed on the mantel. I was the forgotten kid, the spare. From as early as 7, I understood where I fit in our family story, somewhere just outside the main plot. When Michael's basketball team won the middle school championship, my parents threw an epic backyard barbecue for half the block. Streamers in blue and gold, a custom cake, laughter that spilled out onto the lawn. Dad's friends gave toasts about raising winners. I hovered by the picnic table, picking at a can of soda, twirling in a new dress I had begged Mom for all week. Not a single person noticed. At some point, I slipped away and sat on the back porch, watching shadows creep across the grass. It wasn't a one-off. The pattern was set early and deep. A year later, I landed the lead in my elementary school's spring play. A big deal for a shy kid who'd spent her life in Michael's shadow. For weeks, I rehearsed lines in my bedroom, picturing Mom's proud wave from the audience. On opening night, my stomach buzzed as I peeked from behind the curtain, but their seats in the front row stayed stubbornly empty. Later that night, when I dragged my costume home, makeup smudged and hope draining away, Mom just said, "Sorry, honey. Michael needed help prepping for his math test. We'll try to catch the next one." There wasn't a next one. It cut deeper with time. By the time Michael was a high school star athlete, our house was party central for every victory. Banners on the porch, neighbors clapping him on the back, Dad making speeches you could hear from down the block. When I won my first statewide essay contest at 14, I floated home with a shiny plaque, eager to see it hung on the fridge. Mom managed a faint, "That's nice, sweetie," before turning back to sort party supplies. She set it in my room, on top of a pile of old homework, where it gathered dust. Meanwhile, Michael's trophies multiplied across the living room, each one polished, like a sacred artifact. Birthdays were the hardest. On Michael's 16th, they rented out a pizza place, hired a DJ, and surprised him with a brand new mountain bike. On mine, Mom forgot what day it was until I reminded her. That night, she handed me a sweater, 2 sizes too large, with a distracted smile. "You'll grow into it," she said, already caught up in a phone call about Michael's college applications. Dad barely looked up from his fantasy football draft. There was no cake, no song, just the sound of dishes clattering in the kitchen. It was the little absences, too. When neighbors asked about me, Mom would shrug and say, "Oh, Ashley keeps to herself. She likes books." Then she'd launch into a 10-minute update on Michael's latest win. At school events or family gatherings, Dad was always upfront with Michael, high-fiving, snapping pictures. But he never asked about the poetry contest I had just placed in, or the short film I spent months editing on my busted-up Dell. For years, I waited for them to show up, to ask questions, to care. Anything that would break through the wall of polite neglect. Michael wasn't cruel, just oblivious. He'd toss me a casual, "good job," when I flashed a report card with straight A's, then bounce off to text his girlfriend or practice free throws in the driveway. To the outside world, we were siblings, but the chasm between our experiences was something no one else seemed to see. All of this left its mark. The empty seats at performances, the flat smiles, the parties I watched from the staircase. I learned early not to expect anything. Instead, I started journaling at night, pouring out disappointment and small hopes in scrawl across mismatched notebooks. Sometimes, I created stories where a middle child like me got to be the hero, if only on the page. Growing up in Aurora taught me 2 lessons early. You can be surrounded by people and still feel invisible. And sometimes, invisibility becomes armor. I became fiercely independent, pushing down hurt with stubborn dreams that one day I'd do something no one in my family could ignore. Even as a kid, I knew if I wanted to be seen, I'd have to find the light myself. The moment my passion awakened, an artistic turning point. If you had asked me at 13 what I was good at, I probably would have shrugged and mumbled something about reading or daydreaming. After years of slipping through the cracks at home, I'd learned not to expect anyone to notice me, let alone call me talented. Art class was just supposed to be an easy A, a break from algebra or biology, never anything life-changing. But sometimes, the smallest moments spark the biggest shifts. The catalyst came in 8th grade, the fall when I enrolled in Mrs. June Martin's multimedia art elective. She was nothing like the other teachers. Wild earrings, paint on her fingers, sneakers with mismatched laces. On the first day, she wheeled a battered TV into the room. This was before every room had a projector. And said, "Art isn't just about brushes and sketch pads. It's about stories, and stories come alive in all forms." That day, she introduced us to digital storytelling through video. We didn't even have fancy equipment, just old camcorders and free editing software downloaded onto the school's sluggish desktops. Mrs. Martin announced our first project: create a 1-minute video about something ordinary but beautiful. I remember feeling both awkward and excited. Nobody else looked particularly thrilled. Most kids grumbled about being on camera. But something about the idea, a story told with movement, sound, and mood, lit me up inside. Walking home later, I noticed details I'd usually tune out. Golden leaves swirling around a storm drain, sunlight glinting off rain-spattered sidewalks, a neighbor's dog chasing its own tail. Suddenly, everywhere I looked, I saw potential film shots, cuts, transitions, tiny vignettes waiting to be framed. For once, my quiet curiosity felt like a strength, not a social liability. That week, I borrowed the camcorder every afternoon, filming snippets in the park, a little boy balancing on his bike, a row of ducks stepping in rhythm down the creek, my breath making clouds on chilly air. At home, no one paid much attention. Mom absorbed in paperwork, Dad in a heated fantasy football debate, Michael texting his girlfriend. But my world was quietly coming into focus. Editing was painstaking, but mesmerizing. Sitting at the clunky desktop in the corner of my dim bedroom, I pieced together my favorite shots late into the night, tweaking moments until the mood felt just right. I layered soft music over the images, added little captions, and watched as ordinary Aurora became luminous on screen. The day of the class showcase, my nerves were on fire. I'd never shown my work to anyone. Not really. Most students went for silly or slapstick. When my clip, simply titled Little Wonders, played, the room hushed. The images flickered by in a gentle montage. Leaves, sunlight, children's laughter, the quiet magic of overlooked things. It only lasted 60 seconds. But when the lights went up, Mrs. Martin looked at me with real pride. "Ashley, you have an eye for stories most people miss," she said, her voice sincere. For the first time, I felt seen as more than just Michael's sister or the shy girl in the back. Encouraged, I entered my video in the town's annual youth arts contest. It was the kind of event where people usually showed up for dance routines or giant paintings, not a shy teenager's grainy, one-minute film. I didn't expect much. The night of the contest, I sat near the back, hands aching from nervous picking, wishing, just for a second, that my parents might wander in. But they didn't. Mrs. Martin was there, though, giving me a thumbs up from the aisle. To my shock, Little Wonders won first prize. The applause tickled something deep inside me. Half pride, half heartbreak, that I had no one to share it with but my art teacher. The win came with a little glass trophy and a check for $50. But what meant more was a photographer from the local newspaper snapping my picture and asking about my process. Someone cared about my point of view. From that moment, the way I saw myself shifted. I started carrying the school's camcorder everywhere, documenting not just pretty moments, but emotions, shadows, silences, glances, and laughter. I uploaded some of my early works to YouTube under the channel Ashley's Lens, amazed that a handful of strangers clicked like or left comments like, "This feels like home," or "Your editing is beautiful." Each notification was a tiny spark. Maybe my voice mattered, even if it wasn't for my parents. Art became my language, crafting stories when words failed, capturing light when I felt invisible. Mrs. Martin kept encouraging me, offering tips on composition and urging me to take creative risks. Once, she pulled me aside and said, "Ashley, anyone can see what's loudest, but you film what's real." That compliment stayed with me longer than any praise my parents gave Michael. My family never asked about the contests or the videos. They didn't hang my certificate on the fridge or take me out for ice cream like they did when Michael won Athlete of the Year. But for the first time, it didn't matter so much. My films, my stories, had found an audience. I discovered not just what made me unique, but what made me powerful. That autumn was the true beginning of everything. In the silent space where family attention should have been, I built a creative world of my own. It was in that darkness that I found my spark, a passion for noticing beauty, a resilience to keep creating, a belief that my story was worth telling. That spark, lit in art class, would shape every step of my journey that followed. My journey to independence. College years and the birth of Dawn's Lens College wasn't just a new chapter for me. It was the chance to finally step out from the shadows of my family's living room trophies and empty dinner conversations. It was autumn when I packed my life into 2 battered suitcases, one for clothes, the other for notebooks, headphones, and my old camcorder. Aurora seemed to shrink in the rearview mirror as my dad's SUV rumbled east toward downtown Denver, where the University of Colorado Denver awaited. Move-in day was chaos. The quad pulsed with pop music, and students lugging plastic bins up concrete stairs, parents hugging their kids goodbye, laughter bouncing off red bricks. My parents weren't the sentimental type. Dad, grumbled about parking. Mom checked her phone, already halfway through her work emails. After setting my suitcases on the bed and handing me a stack of grocery gift cards, they offered quick hugs. "Study hard, Ashley," Dad said, "and call if you need anything for rent." Then they were gone, just like that, alone in my shoebox dorm room. With its view of the maintenance lot, I felt both terrified and oddly, exhilaratingly free. My financial situation was as bare bones as my new room. My partial scholarship covered tuition, but I knew I'd need to work for everything else. Meals, textbooks, toiletries. Within the first week, I landed a job at Java Junction, a cramped campus coffee shop with sticky tables and a burnt espresso smell that seeped into my clothes. My hands trembled, making lattes those first mornings. But the extra cash meant I could afford a pack of colored pencils or a used hard drive for my ever-growing archive of footage. If high school had made me feel overlooked, college was a universe with no spotlight at all, a place of anonymity where no one expected anything from the quiet, dark-eyed girl taping flyers to the wall for open mic night. But I learned quickly how to carve out space. I joined the Digital Media Club, a ragtag group meeting in a forgotten classroom after hours to bounce ideas for short films, trade editing tips, and geek out over the latest video gadgets. There were people there who loved stories the way I did, who saw the world as a collection of snapshots and moments to be sampled and remixed. Classes pushed me hard. Intro to narrative video, digital storytelling, and critical theory in new media. My favorite was taught by Professor Alan Burke, a fast-talking, silver-haired man who demanded brutal honesty. "Show me something that costs you to make," he'd say, pacing the room. "If you're not bearing yourself, don't bother." His assignments were rarely about technical skills. He wanted vulnerability, a film about your greatest insecurity, a video essay on your worst heartbreak. I poured myself into those projects, sending uploads late at night from the library Wi-Fi when my laptop overheated. My work wasn't always pretty, but it felt alive, messy, raw, and profoundly ikai. Those early years were a balancing act. Morning shifts at Java Junction, long afternoons in class or labs, then hours editing footage for a few precious subscribers on YouTube. At the time, just me and a handful of art nerds from the club. I didn't even tell my parents about my channel. I knew the questions wouldn't come. Instead, I named my little corner of the internet Ashley's Lens, after a joke from a club friend who said I looked at ordinary things and found stories nobody else saw. My roommate, Jessie, quickly became my unlikely partner in crime. She was loud, chaotic, always blasting indie pop and covering our ceiling in fairy lights. At first, we bounced off each other, her extroversion versus my quiet observation. But one weekend, she stumbled upon a rough cut of a short film I'd left playing on my laptop. "You made this,"
Finally,
she asked, eyes wide, pressing play again. "It's like beautiful, Ash. It feels like something I've felt, but never said out loud." That one honest reaction cracked something open in me. From then on, Jessie starred in half my videos, dragging me to open mics and dance recitals, turning our room into a makeshift set when inspiration struck. Midway through sophomore year, I posted a 2-minute video essay called "Quiet Places" to Ashley's Lens, stitched together from late-night campus walks, dorm hallways after finals week, and shots of falling snow outside my cafe window. I didn't expect much, but within days, the view count grew tenfold. Comments appeared. "This is exactly how loneliness feels. You made me cry in a good way." From strangers scattered across the country. That was the first time I felt genuine proof that my art mattered, not just to me or someone obligated to care, but to real people out in the world. I started setting goals. One new video every other week, faster cuts, bolder themes, even collaborations with classmates who'd never considered showing their work before. Some nights, I'd work straight through until sunrise, the glow of After Effects and Premiere reflecting in my tired eyes, headphones pulsing with music that kept me awake. Inside the chaos of school, work, and content creation, I grew. Hard moments reshaped me. My bank account dipping into double digits, missed buses in winter snow, a professor's "Not your best, Parker," scrawled in red ink. Still, I pressed forward. For once, the expectation didn't come from family. It came from a part deep inside me, a rebellious urge to prove I could make something lasting, on my own terms. By junior year, Ashley's Lens had snowballed. 5,000 subscribers, then 10,000, then 50. Brands began reaching out for small partnerships, launching products or covering local events. I posted behind-the-scenes vlogs, tutorials on jump cuts, even a series where I interviewed other student creators about their process and their pain. What started as a passion project became both my creative outlet and, little by little, a source of real income. I bought my own editing rig, saving each check until I didn't have to rely on hand-me-down tech anymore. The turning point came in my third year, when Professor Burke pulled me aside after class. The National Digital Creators Challenge is looking for college teams for their social impact campaign, he said, leaning against the desk. I want you to lead ours. Terrified, but determined, I agreed. My team, 3 other students as obsessed as I was tasked with producing a series of 1-minute videos on mental health awareness. We juggled classes, jobs, and endless drafts, filming interviews across campus, animating infographics, experimenting with voiceover. After months of caffeine-fueled nights and creative breakdowns, we submitted our campaign. I must have refreshed my email 100 times, waiting for results. When the acceptance letter came, I burst into tears in Java Junction's break room. We'd won first place in a US $10,000 grant, earned national recognition, and a spot on a nonprofit's website watched by tens of thousands. For once, I let myself celebrate. I called Mom to share the news, but she sounded distracted. That's nice, honey. Michael's prepping for his job interviews. Her tone was polite, distant, and the familiar pang of disappointment flickered. But I could feel myself moving past it, even as I hung up. What no one from home seemed to understand was that college wasn't just teaching me media production or communication theory. It was teaching me to choose myself. Every short film I made, every unsubtle vlog, every waking hour spent storyboarding was cementing a simple truth inside me. I didn't need validation from the people who never saw me. I was building proof of my own worth, brick by digital brick, for anyone in the world who cared to watch. As graduation approached, the success of Ashley's Lens changed everything. I turned down entry-level jobs that felt safe but uninspired. Instead, I rented a tiny 1-bedroom just off Colfax, doubling down on freelance gigs, event recaps for local bakeries, punchy Instagram stories for Denver startups, branded TikTok reels for coffee shops. I reinvested every dollar into my growing channel and portfolio until Ashley's Lens wasn't just a name, but a presence, recognized at student film festivals, cited in social media roundups, a place where lonely young creators left messages late at night hoping for acknowledgement. Looking back, the college years were harder than I expected, much lonelier, often sleep-deprived, deeply uncertain, but they were also thrillingly, achingly real. For the first time, I lived without waiting for someone else to hand me a script. Between coffee shifts and video edits, cramped dorms and self-doubt, I discovered what it meant to direct my story. Dawn's Lens, renamed from Ashley's Lens, for the sense of new beginnings, was no longer just a digital escape. It was a declaration. I had found my voice, and people were finally listening. Startup, building $1 million career. Graduating from college was an uphill finish, but crossing that stage was just the beginning. Suddenly, everything that had marked my life for so long, being overlooked, unappreciated, and undervalued, became fuel for something bigger. The ink was barely dry on my diploma when I signed the lease for a cramped, sun-flooded apartment 5 blocks from downtown Denver. The place came with paper-thin walls, a leaky faucet, and a rent bill that made my heart skip a beat. I didn't care. This was independence. That first summer after graduation, I took every odd editing job I could find. I shot birthday parties, spliced together wedding highlight reels, and put together Instagram clips for hair salons. Back then, I'd roll up to shoots on the city bus, my battered DSLR clattering against a grocery bag full of tripods and cables. No client was too small. I wasn't looking for big checks. I wanted experience and a foot in every possible door. Nights blurred together in a haze of ramen, half-emptied cold brew bottles, and the persistent hum of my laptop. Denver's startup scene was buzzing, and the air in every co-working space was thick with caffeine, ambition, and 90s hip-hop. I set up shop at a scrappy, low-budget workspace called The Hive, surrounded by other freelancers and hopeful founders hustling long after sunset. My YouTube channel, recently rebranded as Dawn's Lens, began to flourish as well. What started as a creative outlet now became my portfolio, a living archive of short films, motion graphics, and vlogs documenting my freelance grind. Brands occasionally reached out for sponsored segments or social content, and my subscriber count ticked upward. I wasn't making big money yet. Most checks just covered groceries, but I was building momentum. Around this time, I started to see a gap in the Denver market. Every business, from coffee shops to law firms, needed high-quality, eye-catching video content. But few could afford the slick production agencies that catered to national brands. I realized I could specialize in fast, affordable, and emotionally resonant short-form media, capturing the soul of a local business in under 60 seconds. Social media was king, and attention spans were shrinking. Quick-hit videos that told a story in 30 seconds could make all the difference for companies desperate for relevance. I brainstormed a business name for days, landing on SparkFrame Studio, a nod to bright beginnings and framing everyday life through my camera lens. I built a DIY website, cold emailed every business owner I'd ever met, and spent entire weekends filming promotional reels for next to nothing. My first corporate contract came from a vegan bakery. US $750, 2 weeks of work, and a dozen cupcakes as bonus pay. It was humble, but I treated it like a Super Bowl ad campaign. As bookings rolled in, my workflow exploded. I juggled pre-production calls with late-night editing, drove my second-hand hatchback to shoots across the metro, and built a rotating network of creative collaborators, mostly broke but bright college friends, who doubled as actors, voiceover talent, or set dressers. It wasn't glamorous, but the energy was infectious. Every like from a new client felt more exhilarating than anything I'd ever gotten from my own family. The magic, I realized, wasn't just in the filming or the editing. It was in listening, hearing the stories small business owners wanted to tell, understanding what made them unique, then weaving those stories into punchy, shareable digital snapshots. Each video was a tiny bridge, connecting my need for meaning with my clients' hunger to be truly seen. As my roster grew, so did the size of my clients. A locally loved taco shop, a nonprofit arts foundation, then finally, a Colorado-based athletic apparel company looking to expand their reach on TikTok. A single TikTok campaign, clever, kinetic, and heartfelt, went viral in the state. Orders for the client tripled. Suddenly, my phone was buzzing off the hook with "Can we talk?" DMs from other business owners. By the end of my first year, Spark Frame Studio had amassed over 100,000 followers across YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram. Revenue passed 6 figures in the 12th month, almost unimaginable to the Ashley of a few years before. With each signed contract, I started to believe I was building something real. Of course, scaling up was its own trial by fire. My apartment was too cramped for the ever-growing piles of lighting gear and props, so I rented a tiny co-working suite at the Hive, turning it into a carousel of brainstorming sessions, casting calls, and impromptu lunches on the floor. I brought on my first intern, a film school senior named Jamie, who brought endless ideas and zero interest in sleep. Within months, 2 became 4, then 10, a team young, hungry, and all in on the dream. The hustle was relentless. There were nights when I crashed face down on my couch, fingers still twitching from editing, jolting awake after 2 hours of sleep to meet a client for a sunrise shoot. Sometimes we celebrated new deals with takeout pizza. Other times, we regrouped after client rejections or tech disasters that left me questioning everything. But the highs always outweighed the lows. A turning point came the following spring, at a local tech and media conference, where startups pitched to investors. I nearly didn't sign up. Imposter syndrome gnawed at me. But Jamie talked me into it, and we built a killer reel. After 10 agonizing minutes in front of a panel of venture capitalists, I was sure I'd bombed. Instead, one of the judges, Susan Grant, a sharp, fearless investor with a reputation for spotting sleeper hits, cornered me in the lobby. "Your work cuts through the noise," she said, her voice low and direct. "Let's talk numbers." A month later, Susan invested $200,000, enough to bring my scattered operation into the daylight and hire a full professional crew. We moved Spark Frame Studio into a real office. Glass walls, gritty brick, caffeine-fueled energy. The team bonded fast and worked even faster. We refined our brand voice, pitching not just video, but strategies. How to leverage analytics, time video releases, and harness virality on emerging platforms. The growth was staggering. Big-name clients, regional banks, a craft beer company about to go national, a major wellness influencer, began inquiring about contracts. We built out our own in-house content studio, expanded our reach to more than 1 million followers. And for the first time in my life, I saw my name on bylines in major business and creator publications. It wasn't just about revenue anymore. Though crossing 7 figures was mind-blowing. It was about impact, mentoring new hires, sponsoring creative scholarships, and being the kind of leader I always wished I had as a kid. The studio's Wednesdays were for open pitch. Anyone, from intern to manager, could offer new campaign ideas or wild innovations. I encouraged risk, knowing firsthand that one tiny moment, a spark, could change someone's trajectory. Success caught the city's attention. We received local business awards, invites to conferences, and interviews with Denver's top podcasts. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the office window late at night, exhausted but radiant, caffeinated but deeply fulfilled. I'd become the driver of my own story. The ultimate validation came when a national streaming platform reached out with an offer. They wanted to acquire Spark Frame Studio, roll our creative horsepower into their short-form content division, and bring our entire team along for the ride. 6 months of negotiations led to an astonishing offer. Use $18 million. It was the stuff of tech founder dreams. The day the deal closed, I paid off my student loans, gave everyone on my team a substantial bonus, and bought myself a midnight blue Tesla Model X. As I slid behind the wheel, feeling the quiet hum beneath my hands, I remembered all the lonely nights, all the victories uncelebrated by those who should have cared most. The car wasn't just a reward, it was a symbol. I had turned every ounce of pain, invisibility, and longing into something nobody could ignore. Yet what mattered most wasn't the title, the money, or even the viral campaigns. It was the sense of agency I'd claimed, the power to choose my path, invest in others, and prove that unnoticed beginnings could lead to the brightest of frames. For the first time, I didn't need applause. I had built my own world, and finally, I was seen. Building my own happiness, finding my real family. When Spark Frame Studio finally sold, and I signed the closing documents alone in a glass-walled office, the celebration felt muted. The numbers on the check were staggering, but success tasted different without someone to come home to. No arms waiting with pride or joy. That night, I drove my new Tesla Model X through the city lights, the car humming beneath me, the night air seeping in through a crack in the window. I'd made it, but sometimes the silence felt louder than any applause could. What I didn't know then was that the real story was just beginning. The story of finding genuine belonging and redefining what family really meant. I first met Chris Taylor on a day that was perfectly ordinary, the kind you'd almost forget if it wasn't for the small miracle tucked inside it. It was a rainy Tuesday in Denver, and I was at my usual haunt, Bluebird Cafe, wrestling with a misbehaving laptop that refused to render my latest video edit. Frustrated, I muttered under my breath, and that's when Chris leaned over from the next table. A guy in a black hoodie, dark-rimmed glasses, and an easy, crooked smile. "Need a hand?" he said, showing a flash of his engineering ID badge. I eyed him suspiciously. "If you can fix Final Cut crashing, you're basically a wizard." He laughed, a warm, rumbling sound, and slid into the seat next to me. In 10 minutes, he'd solved the problem, teaching me 2 tricks along the way. We talked about broken tech, indie documentaries, Denver's unpredictable weather, and before I knew it, my coffee was cold and the rain had stopped outside. That was how it began. Simple, unplanned, genuine. We exchanged numbers, and over the following weeks, coffee shop run-ins became intentional meetups, then official dates. Chris wasn't flashy. He was an engineer at a local firm, patient and thoughtful. The opposite of the entrepreneurs that flooded my social circles. Where I was restless, Chris was steady. He listened, really listened, even when I rambled about color grading or campaign deadlines. When I felt lost, he had a way of taking my hand, grounding me without saying a word. Unlike my family of origin, Chris's world was filled with warmth. The first time he brought me home, his parents greeted me at the door with hugs that left no room for hesitation. His mom, Gloria, a retired English teacher with a love for murder mysteries, immediately set an extra place at Sunday dinner and peppered me with gentle questions. His dad, Tom, grilled burgers in the yard, regardless of the season, always ready with stories about Chris's childhood misadventures. His younger sister, Kelsey, would text me for advice about her art school portfolio, and even Chris's gray-muzzled childhood Labrador, Duke, insisted on sprawling across my feet by the fire. Their house was noisy, cluttered, completely alive, a universe away from the hush and formality I'd grown up with. It felt like breathing for the first time in years. Chris and I built a rhythm together. He'd swing by my office with takeout during my late editing nights, sitting beside me, quietly reading, or sometimes just dozing on the sofa while I worked. On his toughest days, when tight project deadlines or office politics got to him, I became his rock, listening over long walks around City Park or movie marathons, cocooned under thrifted blankets. On weekends, we split our time, sometimes lost in good-natured arguments over grocery lists, sometimes testing every brunch spot in Denver, other times visiting farmers markets or hiking in the Rockies. Our love wasn't some whirlwind romance. It was slow, certain, patient, a partnership built on trust and mutual support. Chris never saw my past insecurities as baggage. Instead, he called them evidence I was built stronger than most. It was his family who gently nudged me out of emotional hiding. Holidays became something to anticipate instead of dread. Thanksgiving at the Taylors meant too many pies, a kitchen full of laughter, and board games that stretched late into the night. Birthdays were celebrated, not with fanfare, but deliberate, loving gestures, handwritten cards, a favorite cake, a playlist shared over the dinner table. For the first time, when someone asked how my day was or congratulated a milestone, they really meant it. One evening, as autumn leaves turned Denver gold and red, Chris surprised me with a picnic under the cottonwoods in City Park. He spread out a blanket, unpacked my favorite sandwiches, and, amidst a scatter of yellow leaves, knelt and pulled out a ring. I don't care where we live or what we have, as long as we build something together. Marry me, Ash. His hands shook. Mine did too, but for a new reason. Hope. I said yes without hesitation. Planning the wedding was surreal. I kept it intimate, an outdoor ceremony beneath festoon lights, wildflowers as centerpieces, our closest friends and Chris's family gathered, laughter spilling between sips of bubbly. I sent invitations to my family, Dad, Mom, and Michael, just in case, clinging to a faint hope for healing, or at least a sign that they might show up for me. They didn't reply. They didn't come. When I walked down the aisle, Chris's mother hugged me tight at the altar. Chris's father wiped away a tear, as if I'd always been his daughter. Kelsey caught my hand, squeezing as she whispered, "You're one of us forever." The love was overwhelming. Every gap my family had left in me was slowly filled in, patch by patch, with understanding, care, and a sense of finally being seen. The wedding day was the happiest of my life, for reasons no spreadsheet or bank statement could hold. In every photo, I'm radiant, but it's not because of the dress. It's because of the community of hands and hearts holding me up. We didn't have a traditional first dance to impress anyone. Instead, Chris and I spun barefoot under the stars, surrounded by laughter and the mismatched chorus of friends attempting to harmonize along. After all the guests left and we were alone, Chris touched my cheek and said, "This is what family looks like." I believed him. For the first time, I didn't feel the old ache of what I'd lost. Instead, I cherished what I'd gained. Our marriage grew in the small, daily ways that matter most. We bought a yellow-sided house on a quiet Denver street, porch swing, community library box, peony bushes that bloomed every June. Sunday dinners rotated between our home and his parents, always open door, sometimes shared with our neighbors, and, eventually, our own close friends, who'd become just as much family. The rituals of togetherness, movie nights, chili cook-offs, late night, I can't, sleep talks, brought me into a tribe whose love didn't depend on achievement, but on acceptance. As Spark Frame Studios' legacy continued through friends and mentees, I found fulfillment in new spaces, mentoring young creators, volunteering at after-school art programs, and giving back to communities that saw and supported their own overlooked kids. Chris stood by me through all of it, just as present in my small moments as in my biggest milestones. Being embraced by Chris's family and weaving our own with threads of laughter, vulnerability, and unconditional support healed the places in me that once believed family had to be earned through accomplishment. I learned at last that real family is chosen. It's found in the people who show up, who ask how you are and stay to listen, who celebrate every win and hold you during every loss. It's not about blood, it's about presence. I went looking my whole life for recognition, thinking it lived in awards or headlines or numbers on a check. But happiness, real, sustained, ordinary happiness, lives in being seen, understood, and loved for exactly who you are. That, at last, is the legacy I am proudest to have built. The wedding, peak loneliness, and a new freedom. The day I got married was everything the magazines promised, and nothing I'd ever truly prepared for. There was the outward spectacle, an autumn sun softening over a garden of wildflowers, festoon lights twinkling across the yard, and the waft of vanilla and cut grass mingling as guests took their seats. My white dress felt both like armor and a costume, borrowed for a role I had spent years rehearsing in dreams and private journals. I'd always imagined this moment would be the pinnacle of happiness, the reward at the end of all that striving and loneliness. But reality, like most things, came layered in its own complicated truths. From the moment we set a date, I was swept up in a storm of decisions. Caterers, invitation fonts, playlists, signature cocktails. Chris and his family rallied around each choice. His mother traced extravagant script onto hand-addressed envelopes. His little sister researched local florists, plastering my inbox with inspiration boards. Chris himself offered quiet reassurance as I cycled between bursts of excitement and sudden pauses at the kitchen counter, lost in my own thoughts. There were giggles during cake tastings and long evenings planning seating charts with friends who were more family to me than my own blood. But one shadow stubbornly lingered despite the glow: my family's absence. I mailed each invitation anyway, addressed in my neatest, almost childlike handwriting, Mom and Dad, and one for Michael, even though we hadn't spoken much in years. I pressed send on a hopeful text to my mother. Would love for you to come. It would mean so much. Keeping the phrasing as gentle as possible, hoping vulnerability might move her in a way that past accomplishments or arguments never had. The silence that followed was freezing. Days blurred into weeks, with no RSVP, no phone call, not even a regretful email. Chris's parents noticed the empty spaces on the guest list, tiptoeing around the topic as kindly as they could. Maybe they'll surprise you. Maybe it's just nerves. You know, weddings can be emotional territory for families. His mother offered, but I knew better. I'd spent my whole childhood learning where not to look for warmth. As the wedding drew closer, my emotions seesawed wildly. There were days brimming with anticipation, choosing the ribbon for my bouquet, hearing my friends toast me with affectionate embarrassment at the bachelorette dinner. Those nights, I felt light, almost invincible, halfway convinced that the love I'd found with Chris and in his family could completely patch every hurt I carried. Other days, I'd be drinking coffee alone at dawn, wrestling a familiar ache that had nothing to do with lost childhood and everything to do with wanting, just once, to be chosen first by those who brought me into the world. The morning of the ceremony, my stomach twisted into knots, while Chris's family bustled outside, stringing lights and setting out chairs. I sat with my maid of honor in a little side room, the hush between us heavy and gentle at once. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly, as she pinned a wisp of hair behind my ear. I nodded, unwilling to speak the grief aloud and risk it taking over the happiness that was supposed to define the day. A half hour before I was set to walk down the aisle, I checked my phone one last time. No calls, nothing. The ache felt sharp for an instant, as if loss was carving out a space inside me for something new, some other kind of freedom that I still couldn't define. Then, the music started, the soft prelude we'd picked months ago in Chris's parents' living room. My breath steadied as I stepped outside, vision blurring slightly in the golden light. Every seat was filled with people who had chosen me, in slow, deliberate, beautiful ways. Jesse, my college roommate and filmmaking partner, sidestepping in strappy heels to snap candid Polaroids. Friends from the Hive, clutching DIY confetti poppers. Chris's family, with eyes already glistening as I met their gaze. For all my worry, the moment I entered the aisle, the loneliness didn't recede, but it morphed. It sat quietly beside me, no longer something to shake away, but something I finally acknowledged as a companion. And in that acceptance, it softened. The ceremony was a gentle blur, a flurry of exchanged vows, laughter over a joke Chris slipped into his promises, just for me, tears rolling down both our cheeks. I could feel the presence and the absence equally. Chris's mother squeezing my hands at the altar, his father beaming with fierce, unmistakable pride, Kelsey pulling me into her orbit as if I'd always been her big sister. But there was an invisible row. Behind the last chair, seats I'd mentally reserved for Mom, Dad, Michael. They remained empty, a silent chorus echoing every milestone they'd failed to witness in my life. And yet, after the ceremony, while the celebration pulsed around us, glasses clinking, music spilling across the garden, children darting between tables, something unfamiliar bloomed inside me. Freedom, but not the kind found in wild nights or reckless choices. This was the quiet, anchoring sort. Freedom from expectation. Freedom from that endless ache for approval. Freedom even from the old story of my life, as defined by who hadn't shown up. During the toasts, my best friend Jesse stood and spoke words that cut through the nostalgia and landed squarely in the present. "You taught me that family is what we make it." I've never known anyone who could turn loneliness into light the way you do, Ash. The crowd laughed and cheered, and I realized that every person clapping was part of the family I'd built, one relationship, one act of trust at a time. Later, Chris and I retreated from the whir of music and dancing. We slipped off our shoes and walked barefoot on the cool grass behind the reception tent, the world quiet except for the hum of crickets and faraway laughter. He took my hand and pulled me close beneath a string of lanterns, whispering, "You're not alone, not ever again." In that moment, the loneliness peaked and then transformed, not into bitterness or regret, but into a kind of peace I had never known. Our first dance wasn't choreographed perfection. It was messy in the best way. Tears, real laughter, arms tangled around waists and necks, friends gathering to join in soon after. I looked around at the faces, diverse, shining, many patched together from different corners of my life, and felt gratitude swirl through me. I was free, free to love, to grieve, to celebrate, to finally accept the fullness of my story. The party lingered long into the night, the bonfire crackling as stories and old memories were passed around like treasure. As I hugged friends goodbye, I realized I would always carry the ache of those missing, but it no longer defined me. The ending of one story, daughter, sister, the girl forever waiting to be seen, had finally, irrevocably, become the beginning of another. The day the wedding ended was when my real marriage to myself, my chosen family, and the life I had built truly began. I curled up with Chris beneath the covers that night, and for the first time, slept easy, loneliness quiet beside me, and freedom at my side, facing, conversing, letting go. When money can't be love, after the wedding and the whirlwind of launching Sparkframe Studio into the stratosphere, there was a strange, almost tranquil emptiness to my life. A routine now colored by steady love, creative pursuits, and a sense of belonging. Occasionally, success barged in with new problems, but none caught me off guard, quite like the call from my mother. It happened a few weeks after the news of my company's $18 million acquisition, and, more notably, for my old neighborhood crowd, a social media post featuring my brand new midnight blue Tesla parked outside my cheerful Denver house. I didn't share it to boast. It felt more like a milestone marker for myself, a symbol for the quiet girls who never got picked, and a digital note to anyone out there feeling invisible and believing that maybe, just maybe, their moment might come too. The silence from my biological family was nothing new. I'd adjusted, sown new relationships in the places their absence left raw. But when the call came, a strange heaviness knotted at the back of my neck. "Ashley, we need to talk," my mother said in her clipped, businesslike tone. "Family meeting, tomorrow. Your father, Michael, and I will all be there." For an irrational moment, my heart leapt. Was this it? The olive branch? The long-awaited apology? Or maybe even just acknowledgement that something had gone missing between us. And perhaps success could break the ice where love had failed to flow for decades. Even Chris's hand on my shoulder, warm and steady, couldn't ease the nervous hope that bloomed and wilted in the same breath. I drove to their house the next evening, unsure what I would find. The brick home looked much the same. The rose bush trimmed, driveway chalk lines faded, blinds at perfect attention. My stomach twisted as I rang the bell. My mother opened the door with a tight-lipped smile, and I could hear my father's television in the background, Michael's voice upstairs. Dinner was tense and perfunctory. Pleasantries flickered and died quickly. Old rhythms asserted themselves. My father's casual indifference, my mother's relentless attempts at surface-level civility, and Michael, older now but unchanged, still radiating a smug gravity, still assuming the world would swing to his orbit. At last, plates cleared, my mother launched into the meeting. "We saw your post, Ash. Congratulations. Really," she said, setting her fork down in that measured way she had of broaching uncomfortable topics. "It's just, with all your success, maybe you could help out. Things haven't been easy. Your dad's retirement didn't go as planned, and Michael's kids will be starting college soon. You know how expensive it is." Michael nodded, his tone businesslike, as if we were co-investors in a startup rather than siblings. "Just a little boost. We thought you'd want to help family." For a while, I listened, really listened, not just to their words, but to what sat beneath them. What struck me wasn't anger, or even the familiar ache of inadequacy. It was fatigue and a quiet clarity. They didn't ask about Chris, my wedding, the scholarship fund I'd started, the nonprofit mentoring I did. Nobody asked if I was happy, if I'd found what I'd always needed. Achievement was the only language we seemed to share, and now it had become currency. I realized, with piercing sharpness, that their interest had little to do with me as a person. I was a means, not an end, an asset now that I was valuable. My heart, bruised but not broken, braced itself for the dialogue I should have initiated years ago. I set my napkin on the table, voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. I know it looks like I have a lot now, but for most of my life, you didn't reach out. Not when I invited you to my art shows, my graduation, or even my wedding. I waited and waited, hoping the next success would bring you here, bring you to me, not what I could do for you. But nothing did. I'm sorry you're struggling, but I've already made choices about where my heart and resources go. There was an awkward silence. My mother looked stricken, perhaps from wounded pride, perhaps from surprise that her forgotten daughter could speak with such resolve. My father muttered something about always helping family. Michael, predictably, tried logic. Don't make this about the past, Ash. Family's family. If you can't help us, who will? I took a breath. I chose to donate most of my earnings to create scholarships for kids in Colorado who grew up like I did, overlooked, needing one person to believe in them. $15 million went into that. I'm using what I have left to build my own family and support the community that supported me. I'm not angry, but I won't let money buy a version of love that was never freely given. My mother began to protest, her voice cracking. Too late apologies, explanations about busyness, and not knowing you needed us. I listened, let her say her piece, and then stood. I've forgiven you, truly, but I'm choosing to let go. If you want a relationship, it has to be built on something other than resentment or what I can provide. The hardest part wasn't walking out. It was resisting the urge to look back, to see if they'd call out and say anything that sounded like, "I'm proud of you," or even, "I'm sorry." They didn't. I drove away, chest hollow but strangely light. Letting go isn't a moment. It's a series of quiet choices. Over the next few weeks, I drew invisible boundaries, stepping back from birthday reminders and holiday invitations, redirecting the urge to fix what was never really mine to mend. Instead, I poured those energies into my real family, into Chris, his parents, friends who always showed up, and the young artists whose lives my scholarship fund now touched. Each mentoring session, each thank you card from a student, filled a space inside me that years of chasing my parents' approval never could. It wasn't a clean break, and grief still bubbled up unexpectedly, like when I passed a family at brunch, or heard my girl on the radio, or saw a childhood Polaroid tucked into an old notebook. But over time, the ache dulled into acceptance, then eventually into hope. Hope that letting go might create a rift wide enough for something truer, some form of respect, maybe, or friendship, to take root with my parents, or maybe just with myself. The money, in the end, did exactly what I'd always wanted recognition to do. Not by love, but build meaning. With the Spark Frame Foundation, I met dozens of teenage Ashleys. Kids from single-parent homes, kids whose gifts were practical or quiet, kids who arrived at audition rooms with shaking hands and uncertain smiles. Their thank you letters broke and mended me anew. One wrote, "You changed my life before we ever met. You made me believe I mattered." That was the love I'd spent my life chasing, the kind given freely, with no price tag, no ledger, and no conditions. With time, I made peace with my old family's limits. I learned to love without needing to be needed in return, to create for an audience of one if that's all the world would grant me, and to rest in the warmth of the home and the legacy I'd built with my own hands.
Your Honor, the
I
prosecution
finally
has failed to
understood.
establish motive.
Letting
The
go
evidence
didn't
presented
mean
simply
shutting
does
the
not meet
door.
the threshold of
It
reasonable
simply
doubt required for
meant
conviction.
walking through one
can't.
that had
I just
always been
can't.
waiting for me. Out into a life
I
where
lied.
value was measured not by earnings or obligation, but by kindness, connection, and the radical act of forgiveness.